Hi, thanks for having me. This is actually wonderful because I love to talk about this. Um, Now that I know that I feel it actually was more of a near death experience, I'll start out, I'll tell you what happened. This happened about 30 years ago, but the memory is still pretty fresh in my mind. I was in my late 30s, I think, something like that. I'm 68 now. I was in my late 30s. I had two small children. I got the flu. And that year, it was a really bad flu, and it was going into pneumonia. And I got severe pneumonia. And the thing about pneumonia, folks, is that if you have pneumonia, you have no idea how sick you are because you're not getting enough oxygen to the brain. So, long story short, I ended up in the hospital for 8 days with trilobar pneumonia, which means that three of the five lobes of my lungs were pretty filled or consolidated with pneumonia, and I could not breathe well at all. It was awful. And I was having fevers and coughing up blood and all that stuff. So they took me by ambulance to the hospital, told my husband that they didn't know if I was going to make it. I didn't know they told him that. I did not know how sick I was because I had pneumonia, I guess. It's like that the Muppets guy who died of pneumonia. Same kind of thing happened. You just don't know how sick you are. So anyway, I'm in the hospital. And I think this experience happened on the first night, within the first 2 days anyway. And what I felt like, I had this experience. It was kind of like a dream. And for these last 35, 38 years, whatever it's been, I called it a near-death experience, but it wasn't until I saw the entire I think an hour and a half video of Dr. Eben Alexander talking about his near-death experience, and that I realized mine was similar. In fact, I look at his experience as kind of a 12-chapter book. I mean, he had the biggest NDE I've ever heard about. But in one of his stages, he described being surrounded by all these beings. And when he said that, okay, so I'll tell you about my experience and then we can compare them. So what happened with me is that all of a sudden, instantaneously, I found myself in a room that wasn't a room. I was myself, but I wasn't myself. I was actually just consciousness. I did not have a body, so I didn't have one of those out of body looking down at my body experiences. What I had was that I just went from being in a hospital bed to being sort of nothing in this area, kind of a room without walls, but there was part of this area that kept sort of opening, and I was surrounded by thousands, if not millions, of what I called them my ethereal healing buddies. And to me, I couldn't see them. They were small little entities all around me, but they were thrumming or humming. There was a vibration coming from them. And I got the sense that if I was to see one, it would be like Cinderella's fairy godmother. I felt like I was surrounded by a billion little fairy godmothers. And in this area that would open and more would come in, I was just surrounded by them. And it was also a feeling of immense love, like you hear in all these other ones. And it was just very positive. But the funniest thing or the funnest thing about that was that these beings all seemed to know each other, and they were all visiting with each other while they were healing me. So it was like, oh, I haven't seen you since the last healing. How have you been? Kind of a thing. But what amazed me when I listened to Dr. Eben Alexander's version, it was like his was a 12-chapter book. And in one of the chapters, he had a very distinct thing where he said he went down this hall or something, and he felt like he was surrounded by little monks, which I think is very cute. Mine were fairy godmothers, his were monks, but he said there was thousands of them. And I think his had little candles, but there was a thrum and a vibration. And so just having mine be really very similar to his in his description of that portion of his trip kind of blew my mind. But what made it even more impactful was I think it was after that I read that the proteins that are in our body that are expelled to heal you when you are sick are stimulated. The proteins are stimulated by vibrations. They were vibrating like crazy. So what I feel like I was somehow in this little chamber with all this energy. It must have just been energy vibrating. And that created, I mean, I'm just looking at it from the nurse scientist point of view, that the vibrations then made my body elicit the proteins that healed me, because that I was okay after that. I broke that. But that's basically what happened. And then I was in the hospital, for 7 more days after that, getting better. And what's sad is, because I didn't really think of it as a near-death experience. I mean, it didn't cause me to change my life, or I didn't, find Jesus or any of those things after that. I just always kind of jokingly said, oh yeah, I had a near-death experience. But back then, I really thought it was more just a dream or a hallucination, or seeing the blood cells behind my eyes. And then when I heard Eben Alexander's, it blew me away. I think that was 2 years ago. And then I did my own little YouTube 2-part version of explaining about this. But it was a fat, okay, bye. Sorry, okay, folks. My husband's leaving. That's all right. The way of the world. Okay, so it was short, but it was sweet, my experience.